Welcome to the Bywords Show. I'm your host, Hannah Hughes. Bywords is all about equipping women for purposeful living by starting conversations, celebrating stories, and inspiring faith. In a world that applauds the hustle, I'm here to help you break free from the lies and come back to what really matters. It's time to get real, get rooted in truth, and come alive in relationship with Jesus so you can show up to each day with intention and confidence no matter where you're at in your story. Here we believe that embracing our stories brings hope, healing, and purpose to the process, and sharing our stories helps others do the same. Whether you're looking for a midweek faith refresh, practical tools for pursuing your dreams, or just need some good old-fashioned girl talk, you're in the right place. Grab your latte and let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Byword Show. Today is the day. I'm so glad you're here. And honestly, I have really been looking forward to this conversation. We have got the body image therapist herself here, Savana Antonation. And I just really cannot wait to dive into this conversation. Savana, thank you so much for being here.
My gosh, of course, I will never miss an opportunity to talk about all things body image, so I'm so happy you're having me on.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like we should just get right into it. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and just tell everybody who you are, a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Savana Antonation. I'm a body image therapist, and I help women leave the diet cycle and heal their body image for good so that they can find body peace and peace with food. So I have been inspired to do this work through my own journey through body image, which I'm sure we're going to get into today. I'm just so passionate about helping women heal their body image and their relationship with food so they can just get back to living their life.
Yes, absolutely. Well, y'all already know this has been a big part of my story as well. So whenever I started following Savannah and hearing about the things she was talking about, I was like, oh my goodness, these are the things that people don't talk about in this journey of healing and food freedom and finding peace in your body. So I guess as we're getting started, let's just go all the way back to the beginning. Would you just share your journey with body image and what it's looked like up until this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So to start off, just kind of like in middle school and high school, I always struggled with body image. And I was never that person that was the skinny friend. All my friends were always way smaller than me. And so that definitely fed into a narrative of not being good enough. And so when I got into university, so when I was in my undergrad at that time, I was struggling a lot with anxiety. And then once I got my anxiety under control, I decided that one of the first things I wanted to do was to get skinny and have a flat stomach. That was my goal at that time. And so that really led me down the rabbit hole of dieting. And at first, it started
Mm,
off with yo yo dieting. And then I did a transformation challenge. And that's when everything really accelerated for me into chronic dieting and just, always wanting to like do the next thing and stay super committed and, all that narrative that we have when we're really entrenched in dieting. And then I did a bikini competition. And then after that
mm,
is when everything spiraled for me because I was the smallest I had ever been. And then I found my anxiety about gaining weight was the highest it had ever been. So I started really, really controlling my food and exercise more than I ever had before, which I know is lots of people's story. Actually, after fitness competitions, it can be really, really hard to just kind of see food as being normal again or see your body as being
yeah.
normal again. Yeah. And so after my fitness competition, coincidentally enough, I ended up starting having symptoms of PCOS. Have you heard of PCOS before?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. But for those who don't know, why don't you just dive into it?
Yeah, totally. So PCOS is like kind of essentially like a hormone disorder. And so lots of women with PCOS will gain weight even though they're, eating healthy, quote unquote. I kind of hate labeling it as that, but there's really no better way to put it other than, you're doing all the things maybe that you would do to typically lose weight, but you actually find that you're gaining weight. And that was exactly my story. PCOS can also affect blood sugar as well, which I have had blood sugar issues as well. So throughout my journey with PCOS, I that was one of my first symptoms was that I was still doing all the things I was doing to lose weight. So like counting calories, doing crazy amounts of workouts in the gym, all that stuff. And I was gaining weight. And so from there is when my body image healing really started. It took me a while of like spiraling and really fighting my body.
Mm,
But But then I got to a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. There has to be another way for me to live my life.
Wow. Okay. So many things in there that I personally relate to, and I'm sure so many other women do. I feel like all women at some point have come in contact with a little bit of these insecurities we face, like whether it's when you're young, whether it's when you're adult, maybe it's postpartum after having babies. Like our bodies just go through so much, and there's so much of the process that people don't talk about. So for you, you said that there was a moment where you knew it was going to spiral and something had to change. So what did that look like? Like when was that moment that you knew something needed to change, and then what did you do from there?
Yeah, so um I was actually on a trip in Hawaii. This was like 2020, so like literally weeks before COVID happened. I was on
Oh my
vacation
gosh.
in Hawaii. No, the memories, hey? So, yeah, so I had honestly mentally ruined that whole vacation. I was there for like 2 weeks
Mm.
and the whole time just hated it and just wanted to get back home because I felt so uncomfortable in my body and, being on a bathing suit in the beach, all that stuff. And I realized on the second last day, I was like, oh my gosh, like this trip is literally done. I love coming to Hawaii. Like I always say, it's one of the places where my soul just feels really at rest. But I didn't feel that time. And
Mm.
I was like, okay, so I've had 2 weeks here. I've hated it the whole time. And why is that? It's because of my body. And then I just really realized that
Wow.
life was passing me by, whether or not I was skinny or, could lose weight ever again. And so in that moment, I was just kind of like, that's crazy. That's crazy that I would actually live my life that way and that I would be okay with just continuing to fight my body and continuing to hate my body if it can't be the way that I want it to look. And look at all the stuff I'm
Yeah.
going to miss out on if I continue going down this road.
Right. Absolutely. And so it's just hard. Like I've been there. I still have moments of struggling with that. And then you're so right. It's like we have to get to this point where we realize life is going to pass by, but how much time and energy are we putting into what our body looks like and thinking about food and stressing about those things? And that is just, gosh, I mean, for those who aren't familiar with my story, I had an eating disorder for almost 7 years throughout my high school and college experience. And I've struggled with body image. I mean, lots of body changes, becoming a mom, postpartum, all of those things. And it is so hard. But looking back, I just realized, wow, those years of my life, I don't really remember much else except being obsessed with my body and obsessed with food. And it's just it's crazy how that can just take over our whole lives.
Totally. And it's funny how when you're in it, you just don't see it, right? Like when you're
Right.
like, and I remember feeling that way that at that time when I was just in it, I was so tunnel vision that I didn't see how bad things were until I got to that point where I was like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
something's got to change, right? And then you're looking back and being like, oh my gosh, like what has the last like 4 or 5 years of my life even been about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were moments for me where I couldn't even enjoy a meal out with friends because I was so nervous about eating the foods that I had labeled bad or feeling guilty after celebration, and it was just this endless cycle of shame and guilt and binge eating because I felt guilty and emotional and then trying to go the opposite extreme, and, like, obviously, there's so much to that. But what was your healing journey like from there? So, like, you got to the moment where you realized something needed to change, and then how did the change happen?
Mhm. So this is where I really lucked out because at the time I was taking my master's, so to become a
Mm,
therapist. So I really was like, okay, so I'm learning all the tools to guide people through healing their trauma. So why can't I heal my body image? Right. And so then all these things I was learning, I really in university, I really started to apply to myself. And so that looked like rewiring the way I was thinking, retraining my nervous system so that I wasn't as triggered around, say, food and, looking in the mirror and things like that. And, lots of people hate it when I say it, but it really does also require shifting our behavior. So that did mean that I had to
mm.
stop dieting. I had to stop weighing myself. I had to delete my fitness pal because all those things were just feeding into the obsession.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I feel The same way. There have been so many times in my life where I'll feel like, okay, well, I'll get to that moment where I realize, okay, something's gotta change. And then I get so extreme about the quote healing process that it ends up being just as toxic as the cycle I was just in before because it's just so intense and so extreme. And I give myself such unrealistic expectations that I can't hold the standards. And then I just spiral back into what I was doing before. So you talked about, deleting the app, stopping the calorie counting, stopping obsessing about those things. What do you think were the biggest changes that made the greatest impact for you in your healing journey?
Mm, that's a good question. So, you know what? I had to get real about social media. So
Mhm.
I had, because I was just, in that bodybuilding world, all the people that I followed in my social media were obviously bodybuilders and, that fitspiration, fit fam
Yeah.
stuff. And I started to realize that social media wasn't really feeling like a safe space for me anymore. And that there were times where even I had said things to myself where I was like, oh, if social media didn't exist, I wouldn't be as anxious about taking pictures or, things like that, where it's like
Mm,
everything just felt like it had to be aesthetically pleasing and you had to look
right.
your best and have the best pose and all that sort of stuff. And so I really had to get real about my social media. And so honestly, diversifying people that were in my seat. So I started following people that were in bigger bodies. I started following people who were doing intuitive eating work and
Mm,
body image healing and things like that. And that made such a huge impact because I always like to tell people that when we're not presenting all sides of the coin to ourselves, we're only going to see what we're looking at. And so,
mm,
like, essentially, what I mean by that is if we're only looking at people who are waking up at 5 a.m., doing their workout, they're in a genetically thin body, then we're going to believe that only those people exist or that, we're the minority when that's actually not true.
yeah, that's so good. I think that is, gosh, one of the best pieces of advice that I've heard in my experience because you're so right. I remember back in the Tumblr days where all of that was just it was just everywhere in your face, and, like, obviously now we've got this algorithm that gives us more and more of what we spend the most time looking at, and so, gosh, that's such a good piece of advice for even just protecting our mental health as we start this journey. Because I feel like you can make all the good diet changes, you can make all the good exercise changes, you can get a plan, you can find support, all that, but if you are constantly still seeing only one body that I don't know, for some reason we've decided is the right body or the healthy standard for eating, whatever it looks like, it just trips us up more than we realize. So I think that is absolutely just crucial for the process
Hmm.
of healing.
Absolutely. And I always like to tell people too that like our thoughts and the way our brain behaves is actually very much like the Instagram algorithm. So the more we
Mm,
engage in specific behavior, so the more we're like seeking out that content or the more we're counting our calories, the more we're stepping on the scale. That's exactly like if we were to click on something on Instagram, like it, engage with it in some way, the algorithm is going to feed us more of that content. And so that's exactly how our brain works. The more that we're calorie counting, the more we're seeking out, specific types of, bodies on Instagram, all those sorts of things that our brain is going to feed us more thoughts around that. So we have to be careful because if we are looking at things that distress us, we're going to have more distressing thoughts about our body image.
that absolutely makes sense. I love that illustration because it's so true. Like a lot of the time we don't even realize that our brain is just doing what we've conditioned it to do. And so when we spend all of our time obsessing about food, obsessing about our body, like we're really just setting ourselves up for more and more of this perpetual endless shame cycle. But I love
Absolutely.
how open you are about the belief that so many women have that you have to be skinny to feel good about yourself or look a
Mhm.
certain way in order to be happy. How did you start shifting your mindset to get free from those kinds of beliefs?
Mhm. So I really had to get real about my core beliefs. So if
Mm,
for listeners or and even if you don't know what core beliefs are, so what I like to describe them as is they're beliefs that our subconscious mind holds on to and our brain will filter information through that core belief. So, for example, my core belief is not good enough. And so, all my
Mhm.
experiences through body image were rooted around like my narrative would be like, my body's not good enough. I'm not skinny enough. I'm not, strong enough. Like all those sorts of things. I didn't
Yeah.
do that good enough. And so, I really had to start to identify like like, how is that belief driving my everyday. Oh, oh my
Uh,
gosh. Okay. Weird. It kinda cut out.
what's weird?
I'm gonna connect to my hotspot,
Okay.
because 'cause I'm just worried that my connection isn't too good, so it might be on my end that that happened.
Okay.
Um, okay. I think it should be good now. Okay, sorry
Okay.
about that. Okay, so
That's okay.
for
It
now I'm
happens.
like, "Where was I?" Okay, so
Do you wanna start well, for me, it cut out where you were talking about your core belief is not enough, if you wanna pick
oh,
up
yeah,
there.
yeah. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So
Okay.
yeah, so with my core belief of being not enough or not good enough, I had to really start to notice like what are the areas of my life where I'm noticing that core belief pop up and how can I start like interacting with this and challenging this belief? And I really got to a point where I had to
Mhm.
realize like when am I just gonna let it be good enough? Right? Like we really have to get to that point where it's like what's my bottom line here? When am I gonna just
Yeah.
allow something to be good enough? And so yeah, so I really, really started to dive into retraining that belief by noticing when it was popping up and challenging that belief, working on nervous system regulation as well. So lots of people don't realize that when we're activated, when we're going into fight or flight, we actually lose function of the part of the brain that thinks rationally. And so when
Mm.
we are spiraling, feeling like we're not good enough or whatever a particular person's core belief may be, they're generally not able to recognize in that moment that it's an irrational belief. And so I really started to slow myself down and, go into deep breathing and, lots of those like supportive behaviors for nervous system regulation while doing my self-talk around not good enough.
Mm. That's so good. That that is just such a huge piece that had to click for me in my own healing journey because I remember when I was going through my eating disorders, I had to go to this therapist and do some, you know, really intense work to figure out like what is that for me? Like when will it ever be enough? Because if we don't know
Yes.
that, we're going to be chasing something that never has an end and we end up so
Mhm.
exhausted and frustrated and that's just such an important thing that I wish more women talked about because whether it's your body, whether it's money, whether it's success, like if we're not real about what that actually looks like and where's the finish line, we're just going to keep running ourselves into the ground.
Yes. And I feel like women, we are particularly preyed on with that narrative of not enough because,
Mm,
it's with our body, it's with, say moms, right? I'm personally not a mom, but I see on Instagram how it's like, do this, do that, bounce back, get your pre-baby body back, but then
yeah.
also be super regulated with your children all the time. Don't yell, gentle parenting, right? Like we see all this narrative for moms. And like I just really feel like women are set up to have this never enough mentality. I truly do. I feel like society kind of almost breeds that in us.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. It's just ingrained in everything in our culture. It feels like from the labels on our food products, commercials, everything we see on social media and just it's insane. Honestly, it is just insane to me that that is normal. But I just it just makes me it's crazy to me that that's normal, like, especially now that I'm raising a daughter in this world, I'm like, "I don't know. I don't even know how to help myself with this sometimes." It's hard.
Yes. And I always like to tell moms because it is hard for us to sometimes like start this, I'm just going to let this be enough mentality. It's hard for us to start it for ourselves sometimes. So I always tell moms if you can't do it for you in the beginning, do it for your daughter, model it for her so that she can see where it's like, mom's really tired today, so I'm going to sit down and have a rest, and I'm going to honor that for me, right? Like if we can
Yes.
model that for our children, I think that's so powerful um because I feel like kids are so smart, and so if we're buying into that narrative of never enough and our behaviors being driven by that, but then yet we're trying to tell our kids the opposite, they're going to be like, well, you're doing the opposite, so I don't believe you.
Right. Oh, absolutely. It's so funny you bring that up because that's one of the biggest things for me. I mean, I was going through therapy and things like that, working on a lot of my image issues when I was in my teen years. But then a lot of it came back up when I became a mom because I was thinking, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm barely getting a handle on food and my relationship with food and my body and all this stuff." And now I've got this other person to take care of and feed them and, cooking meals for me and my husband and trying to figure out like what's healthy, what's right. How do I do this for like more than myself? Sometimes it's overwhelming, but I would love to hear your thoughts on the food piece because I I feel like this is a part that's just not talked about as much in the body image world as the relationship with food.
Yes. 1000%. And what lots of people don't understand is that it is usually our body image that's driving the relationship with food. So when people say, I have a
Yeah.
really bad relationship with food, I'm immediately starting to, look for signs that maybe they struggle with body image. Because if we think about it, food has been preached to us to be used as a tool to shrink our body. Same with exercise, right? That's been
Mm,
kind of taught to us as being a calorie burning tool. And so those things generally do go hand in hand, where when we struggle with body image, we usually see restrictive behaviors around food, lots of like that binge and restrict cycle, because then there's lots of guilt
yeah.
and shame that comes along with dieting.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another part that just feels like a little taboo to talk about because I feel like in the food world, it's either like diet culture, crash dieting, here's what you need to do to lose weight, or just, like talk about food where it's not even anything attached to mindset, body image, anything like that. So, what do you teach people when it comes to finding peace with food and working through the body image piece in relation to eating and food?
So I do love intuitive eating. And so I follow that
Mm.
framework for helping people heal their relationship with food. And so for those that don't know what intuitive eating is, it's a beautiful framework that helps us be able to step away from dieting and be able to put that on the back burner, as well as, be able to help us just like put body changes on the back burner as well. So we're no longer focusing on weight loss, and we're kind of merging together our knowledge of nutrition as well as our instincts and intuition around food. So essentially what that means is we're kind of balancing out eating our fruits and vegetables and things that make us feel good, but then also balancing out eating things that make us feel happy and joyful. So, those things that maybe we crave that diet culture would deem as not being healthy. And so there's a process that we go through with intuitive eating where we're getting rid of those labels from food. We're giving ourselves unconditional permission to eat. And that's actually key in the beginning, is the unconditional permission to eat, because I often find that lots of people will have that restrictive mindset, not and generally with calorie restriction as well, but also just with you can only eat up to a certain point, or you can only have one cupcake, right? And it's though that
Right.
restrictive thinking that actually drives that like overconsumption of it.
Yes, absolutely. That makes total sense. So when you are I'm interested about this as well because I feel like this is something that I've never heard really anybody talk about. But if you are talking to someone maybe who has been extreme into dieting, working out, maybe fitness competition style, and they're trying to find like, okay, what's a healthy relationship with food where I'm not obsessed with being skinny? Or
Mhm.
somebody who maybe is like, okay, well, I want to lose weight or I need to lose weight for my health but I don't wanna do that in a way that gets me into a cycle of restriction and all of that. Like, is there a sweet spot in there somewhere?
So, you know what? I always like to tell people, like, let's put the weight loss on the back burner and let's just lean into the intuitive eating and let's just see what happens, right? Because I often find, so say,
Mm,
like, I have a 12-week program, Body Freedom Breakthrough. And so when women start the program, they'll absolutely have a desire to lose weight. Like, I don't expect women coming into the program to already be at the point where they're like, well, I don't want to lose weight anymore. It's fine. Everything's fine. Right. That's the
Yeah.
work that we're doing in the program. And so at the beginning of the program, there is often that desire. But then come the end of the program, the desire looks a lot different because those thoughts and feelings of I feel fat or I should start a diet, those all serve a role and they're all driven by our nervous system. And so when we start to learn the role of those thoughts, we start to actually interact with them a lot differently.
That is so good. Oh my gosh. While you were saying that, it just brought back this moment to me whenever I was in therapy for my eating disorder one time, and I struggled with that so much. Like, to me, health wasn't even a priority. Obviously, I was in my teens also, so I was like, whatever, I'll be fine forever. But the only concern for me was looking a certain way. I felt like I would be happy, I would be less stressed, I would feel more confident when my body looked like this, whatever. And if I ever was overwhelmed or stressed or just felt out of control, I would say to my therapist, like, I just feel fat. I just feel ugly, whatever. And she was like, fat is not a feeling. So what are you actually feeling? And I just remember it being so challenging for me to actually get behind that and figure out, like, what is actually the thing under here that's making me feel so unsettled in my body, you know?
Yes, I love that you bring that up because diet culture and eating disorders as well have a way of bringing us out of our, internal emotional experience, and it's more so just focused on like numbers, science, logic, like does this make sense to do this, right? And so
Mhm.
it's more so focused on that versus and it takes us out of the part of the brain that would be focused on processing emotion, identifying how we're
Mm.
feeling. And so we do often lose touch with those things. And so that's something that we really do have to practice when we're in recovery and healing our relationship with our body and food is what is my internal experiences? How do I feel about this? And, what is this experience like for me?
Yeah, that it's just so crazy because I feel like when you start that process of even just being willing to investigate what's beneath the surface, you end up realizing, well, number 1, like, there's a lot deeper healing that has to and can happen in the process, and also, like, wow, like, what greater freedom. It's not just, like, feeling good in your body, it's, like, being free in your emotions, in your mind, like, that's incredible. So I love that that's the kind of work that you do in the Body Freedom Breakthrough. Would you share a little bit about that? Like, how do we start to heal and make changes that actually will last?
Yes. So I always like to tell people we want to get to the root of what is happening with our body image. So, like addressing those core beliefs, addressing our nervous system, addressing our relationship with food, because as long as we stay in the diet cycle, we're going to continue to be in the diet cycle. Right. And what we
Mm,
know about dieting is it makes our life smaller. And so we end up becoming a slave to the dieting behaviors to have good body image. Whereas when we're healing our body image, we want to be able to, even if we're having a bad body image day, because we can't avoid those ever, right? Like, even as a body image therapist,
right.
I still do get, some days that do feel a little bit distressing around my body image. But I don't let that stop me from living my life. I don't continue to allow that to make my life small by engaging in behaviors that are restrictive. And so it's all about learning how can we interact with those beliefs differently and how can we refocus and get what we want out of our life rather than living for trying to chase this like better body image day that's promised to us through dieting.
Oh, that's so good. I feel like this is the message that every single woman in her 20s and 30s, like, who grow up in diet culture and the Weight Watchers era, like, needs to hear.
Yes, 1000%. We all grew up in the
Yes.
era where we heard people say, like, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels, and like all those really
Mm,
harmful sayings. And so I think that we've all been fed this narrative where we've believed that life would be better if we were skinnier. But it's actually not true. Like, I had been the skinniest I had ever been, and I was the most anxious I had ever been. And so
mm.
it's just not a true narrative.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. Yeah, I am so thankful that there are people like you and others who are doing this work to rewrite the narrative to help other people heal so that we don't pass this on to the next generation.
Totally, 1000%.
Yeah. So I'm curious before we go, if you were sitting across from a woman who was just really, really struggling at her body with her body image, like maybe at her lowest point, or even looking back at yourself years ago when you were at your lowest, what would you say to her?
I love that question. So I think I would just invite her to be curious about like when is enough for you? Like if you were to say get to 80 years old and you're looking back on your life, is this what you want to remember? What are the memories? What are the things that you would want to be looking back on or you would be happy that you did? I always like to say to people like I worked in an old folks home when I was in high school and I worked there for 4 years, and I promise everybody that none of the women in that home ever said, "I wish I was skinnier in life," or "I wish I restricted harder. I wish I
Wow.
controlled my food better." No women ever said that. They talked about, things with their kids, their grandkids, traveling, right? Like,
Mhm.
those are the highlights of life, and so I always just like to take people kind of, like, into the future to be like, "What would your future self thank you for?" If, like, if you could do something now, what would your future self be happy that you did?
I love that. That's such a good way to
Mhm.
look at it. Man, well,
Mhm.
I just love this conversation. I feel like I could just sit here and talk about it all day long, and there's so much more to it. But before we go, could you please just tell everybody how they can find you and get connected and continue this conversation and learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram, you can hang out with me at bodyimage.therapist. And then I also do have my 12-week program that I did mention called Body Freedom Breakthrough. And that's where we focus on getting to the root of body image, healing it for good so you can just finally end the diet cycle and heal your relationship with food. So I'm happy to continue any conversations in the DMs. I love just supporting women and watching them win and heal their body image. And yeah.
That's amazing. Well, again, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your story, and for the work that you're doing. It is just really incredible to see that you have committed to the process and now are able to help so many other women find freedom as well. So, thank you so much for being here today and sharing with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune into another episode of the Byword Show. I love having you here, and I am truly so thankful for your support. Don't forget to share a screenshot of this episode to let me know you were here. And quick favor, if you enjoyed this episode, would you take a second to leave a review? It really helps our community grow. If you want more, you can shop my books Waking Up and Love Is at thehannahhughes.com or on Amazon. And be sure to join my email list for all the latest news. I can't wait to chat again soon, but in the meantime, be sure to come connect with me on social media, and remember, I'm cheering you on.